You got to get people to understand, one, because get this argument a lot. Greek mythology predates any biblical manuscript that we have, including the Septuagint. Greek mythology goes back to at least 1000 BCE. So we understand that no, the Torah did not exist. The Bible did not exist. No proven biblical manuscripts existed before 1000 BCE, period, point blank. So we can just end that noise right there, because you'll get a lot of people that say, what are you talking about? You know, the Bible predates Greek mythology. Only in the Bible. Only in the Bible. There's no document nobody is going to produce that they're going to give you any kind of manuscript that's going to predate Greek mythology, period. So suffice it to say, the stories and the stuff we're going to talk about here predates anything biblical. And when you see that, and since we can prove this fact, you have to only come to the conclusion that this is where your biblical religion came from. And this is where Greek mythology stole their stories from ancient Kemet, as you'll see. And all of this stuff, as we've been saying for years, goes back to ancient Kemet. And when you just keep on reading the stories and understanding how you can compare them to Greek mythology, I mean, it's crazy. It's so easy to do so, to compare them, because a lot of the stuff just fits. The terminology, the wording is exactly the same in Greek mythology as it is in the Bible. So we know we have heaven and hell. You know, you have Hades, you have Elysium. So remember in Elysium being like heaven, just like in the movie, Elysium was beautiful. And this is where like rich people lived, and, you know, you had to be selected to get up there or what have you. It's the same thing. Elysium was basically heaven. And a lot of scholars, all of the people who I listed before, all of the scholars all wrote about Elysium and about what it was. So now this is what Pindar had to say. This is Pindar Odes. For those living a righteous life, the good receive a life free from toil, not scraping with the strength of their arms the earth, nor the water of the sea, for the sake of a poor sustenance. But in the presence of the honored gods, those who gladly kept their oaths enjoy a life without tears, while the others undergo a toil that is unbearable to look at. Those who have persevered 3 times on either side to keep their souls free from all wrongdoing follow Zeus's road to the end, to the tower of Kronos, where ocean's breeze blow around the island of the blessed, and flowers of gold are blazing, some from splendid trees on land, while water nurtures others. With these wreaths and garlands of flowers, they entwine their hands according to the righteous counsel of Rhadamanthus, whom the great father, the husband of Re, whose throne is above all others, keeps close beside him as his partner. That is from the Odes of Pindar. Now, when you pay attention to Greek mythology, you have some scholars who write Kronos being the god, the ruler of the underworld. But Rhadamanthus basically roams the underworld and roams Elysium, I should say, but he is a judge of the underworld. Rhadamanthus, his name translates to soothsayer, to a person who conquers, one who conquers or what have you. So Rhadamanthus is also put there in Elysium. He is the son of Zeus and Europa. Remember, Europa is where Europe comes from. Now, according to a lot of Greek scholars, a lot of Greeks who wrote about Elysium was actually on Earth. It was supposed to be at the far western edge for all you flat earthers, edge of the planet, of the Earth. So now this is what Plutarch had to say about Elysium. Now I'm going to read this briefly. Plutarch says, these are 2 in number, separated by a very narrow strait. They are 10,000 furlongs distance from Africa and are called the Islands of the Blessed. Now this is what Diodorus said. Diodorus, in his first book, suggested that the Elysian fields, which were much celebrated by Grecian poetry, corresponded to the beautiful plains in the neighborhood of Memphis, which contained the tombs of that capital city of Egypt. He further intimated that the Greek prophet Orpheus composed his fable about the afterlife when he traveled to Egypt and saw the customs of the Egyptians regarding the rites of the dead. Now, Diodorus' first book, Library of History, Book 1. So now, when you look at the synopsis, it's saying here, Egypt, the origin of the world and of civilized life. The gods, the first men. Egypt, the land, the Nile and its flooding. Egypt, the first kings. Egypt, customs and religion. This is why I tell people to follow Diodorus, because when you understand what he wrote in his writings, he basically is one of the only Greek scholars besides Herodotus who a lot of people distort his work, who basically was giving it to you straight up, was telling you that, you know, the Greeks basically, when you pay attention, is taking this stuff from ancient Egypt and repurposing it for their own gain, for their own benefit. So we see clearly in Greek mythology that they're talking about the planet Saturn. We see clearly that the moons of Saturn are named after Greek gods. All of this is pointing to Saturn. Again, when you start getting into this stuff, it's a reason this stuff is corresponding with these things. And when you get deeper into it, you start to understand what they're talking about, as we'll get into down the line. But suffice it to say that when you look at Egyptian mythology, that they are speaking about Saturn as well. And then, of course, they're not going to go and name it as Saturn. But since we understand that Greek mythology took from Egyptian mythology, we can look at it and say that they were speaking about the same thing. So, as I said before, when the Egyptians are referring to the sun, I believe they're talking about Saturn as a sun and not about the sun we see when we wake up in the morning. Everything, all the aspects that they are speaking about fits Saturn being the sun and not our sun being what they're talking about, because our sun does not have an eye. Our sun does not fit with the description of the, the pineal gland and what everything is speaking to, as far as the Saturn looking like an eye and it having all the characteristics that fit Saturn that does not fit our sun. So clearly it's talking about Saturn. And don't get me wrong, you have the ancient Egyptians, of course, referring to the sun that we see today as well. You just have to understand when they're talking about what. Now, it's going to make a lot more sense when we get down the line and start talking about this more. But now remember, I talked about in Ancient History, Volume 1, the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians' land being part of the Egyptian Empire. And you got to remember, the Phoenicians worshipped El, so did the Canaanites. So when we find El, we know we're talking about the Phoenicians, we know we're talking about the Canaanites, or the Phoenician Canaanites, and we know El to be Saturn. Now, what they'll tell you when you look and you start digging and doing this research, that another name for El was Elah, I-L-A, Elah. And again, this is why I tell you, do your own research. Don't pay attention to what these people say unless it fits, unless you can really get proof for it. Now, Elah wasn't another name for El. Elah was the moon. Elah is the moon god. This is what it's referring to. See, it says a rare spelling, Elah. No, it's talking about a moon god, the moon god. So we can also find Elah in Hinduism. So Elah in Hinduism is the progenitor of the lunar dynasty. So what is the lunar dynasty? It says lunar dynasty. In Hindu mythology, the lunar dynasty is one of the 4 principal houses of the Kshatriya Varna, or warrior ruling caste. This legendary dynasty was descended from the moon, while the other principal houses, the solar dynasty, claims descent from the sun. Then it says here Soria, or Sora, Soras. What are we talking about here? We're talking about Islam. So let's go back to Elah and understand what Elah in Hinduism, Elah can change from male to female and vice versa. So it says here, as a woman, Elah married Buddha, the god of the planet Mercury and the son of the lunar deity Kshatriya, which Kshatriya means moon god. So Elah married Buddha, or Buddha Graha, which Buddha Graha is the god of Mercury. Now it says here, Buddha in Punic mythology is also a deity. He is also known as Soumya, son of the moon. So what these researchers have not put together or are not telling you is you have El, Saturn god, the god of Saturn, and Elah, Elah, which they changed to Al Elah. Now, the thing is, when people start seeing this Ilah, they started separating it, which they should, as the moon god. But when they seen it in reference with El, they figured it was another name for El, knowing that it had to deal with the moon. There's no way you can separate the two. You can't see Ilah and think it's another name for El, which is why I don't know why they put that there. But Ilah is the moon. So you have El Ilah. And what they don't understand that the ancients had already figured out was the connection between the moon and the planet Saturn. So what El Ilah became Al Elah, and so on and so forth. Alat, Al-Uzza, Manat, daughters of the moon god Sin, whatever you want to do to break it up, to make it fit. It's going to correspond with the moon. And of course, you have a lot of people in the Muslim faith, Islamic faith, that can't accept that their religion is based off moon worship. But when you go back and do the research, that's all they did back in ancient Mesopotamia. Remember, Sir Leonard Woolley was the one who had found one of the largest temples of the moon in Mesopotamia. So they found all of these artifacts. This is where they found the statues with the dudes sitting down with the moon symbol on their chest. I mean, look at this stuff. There was finding this stuff all over the so-called Middle East. Worship of the moon. Look at the hands, the way the hands are together, like the prayer we see in Islam today. This is where the stuff comes from. It's ancient. It predates Islam. The stuff was found in the Chaldees. Remember, they found the stelas. Remember, it has the moon symbol on the stela. They've been finding temples of the moon throughout the Middle East for years. It's a bunch of them. They exist. They have existed for a long time, because you had, for a time, as I talked about before, there was a time before the moon, before Earth actually had a moon, that so many ancient civilizations talked about. We know at the top of a mosque, they have the crescent moon. We know that they use a lunar calendar. We know that the new moon marks the first day of Ramadan. So we can find the moon in Islam easy, clear as day. Now, it's the star part that people get confused about. What is the star? The star is clearly Saturn, plain and simple. So this is what it's talking about when it says El Elah. Elah, the moon god. El, Saturn. So we see them with the crescent moon. We see them walking around the Kaaba, which is the black square symbolizing the planet Saturn. And this is what it's going back to. We can see it clear as day. You have Saturn, you have the moon, you have El, you have Elah. Clear as day. So as I said, the ancients, they remember there was a time before the moon. And as many people have talked about, as far as Saturn putting out this frequency and vibration and the moon picking it up, it's a reason why they coupled Saturn and the moon. So a lot of people will tell you, researchers will say, well, they believe that's where it came from. Remember, who built the moon? If you read the book, where did it come from? And you have these civilizations speaking about a time before the moon. This is what they talked about. So you can imagine, as I said, the moon just appearing, there had to be a major event for these people. And all kinds of, temples and monuments went up to the moon who just, appeared. And this is what El Elah is. They put them together. El Elah. So you have Isis, the moon, Ra, the sun, El, Saturn, Israel. It's just that simple. So when you look at these stelas and carvings, that's exactly what it's saying. You have the two suns and you have the moon. So they're telling you one sun, Saturn, which was a sun, and the moon. A lot of people look at these depictions and they wasn't able to put it together of what they mean. There's two suns up there. Clearly that's a sun symbol. Why is it two? There's two. And you can see the one with the waves symbolizing Saturn, as I talked about before in previous videos. So you have these ancients back then marking Saturn, the sun, and the moon. El Elah, or Israel. Plain and simple. And the stuff, it goes back far when you pay attention and look. And in none of this stuff can we find anything alluding to, what they believe Islam to be. It's the moon. It's the moon. It's just tough. And it's crazy that we have all of this death and destruction because people refuse to read. People refuse to do research and to look at where this stuff truly come from. And it could be found within their own history, their own ancient history. I mean, they can walk around there in Mesopotamia and Iraq and find these temples with the worship of the moon. But a lot of them find this stuff and they have no knowledge, so they automatically believe it goes back to Islam, when it goes back to moon worship. Worship in the time when the moon came into existence from the planet Saturn. When you look at the stones and look at the facts, they put all three. This is exactly what they're telling you. So now in the Greek mythology, of course, you have the same thing. You have moon worship. You have multiple moon gods and goddesses. So you have Selene. Selene would be the Roman Luna dealing with the moon. Now, Selene is sister to Eos and Helios, which we know Eos is the goddess of the dawn or the daylight or the sunrise. And Helios, of course, the god of the sun. So we find in Greek mythology, long before Islam, here you have the moon, you have the sun. Plain and simple. Put them together. So we're talking about the same thing, talking about the same stuff. You're going to find, as I said before, with all of these religions going across the world, ancient and present, going back to ancient Kemet, going back to the same stuff. Now, our modern day religions, the main three stem from the Greeks. The Greeks were the only ones that was, closest to Kemet to get this kind of knowledge. Now, I don't think people realize how much Greek mythology is in so much of our everyday life, how in almost every movie that has to do with any kind of fantasy or what have you, you are dealing with stuff that we can find in Greek mythology. It's just that simple. Now, I talked about before how we can look at the Marvel universe and how Marvel was based off of ancient Kemet. Stanley said it out his own mouth. Now, when you look at those old Marvel characters, it's clear as day. You can clearly see they come from Kemet. So you have Marvel, which basically deal with Egyptian mythology. You mix in a little bit of Norse legends and other stuff within Marvel, and that was Marvel. So you have Marvel dealing with Egyptian mythology, and you go to DC. DC clearly dealing with Greek mythology. You have Greek mythology in Aquaman. You have Greek mythology in Captain Marvel, and of course, Wonder Woman. Now, the Wonder Woman movie, I believe it just came out on Blu-ray. It was in the movies not too long ago. And clear as day, if you've seen the movie, it's basically right out of the comics, plain and simple. They did Wonder Woman in the movies exactly out of All-Star Comic number 8, which is the first appearance of Wonder Woman. In All-Star Comic number 8, we first get Wonder Woman, and you can see here clear as day, this is exactly how it starts in the comic. It's the same way it was in the movie, with the plane crash and her finding him in the water or what have you. Same stuff. So now, what is Wonder Woman's real name? Diana. So some of you already know what I'm going to say. Some of you are already like, oh shit. Diana. Who is Diana? What does her name mean? Now, in the comic book, it says clearly, she's going to be named after her grandmother, who was the goddess of the moon. Goddess of the moon. Look at her outfit. You got the moon, her name, Diana, goddess of the moon. Her outfit, you had the stars. So you have the moon, you have the stars. You look at her forehead. You look at the crown thing that she wears on her head. You have the sun symbol there, representing the star or the sun. Wonder Woman is giving you the planet Saturn. It's clear as day. It's giving you Greek mythology, even more clearer. Talk about the same stuff. Diana is the Roman and Greek goddess of the moon. If you remember in the movie, who did she fight in the movie? She fought Ares, the god of war. Ares. The whole movie dealt with Zeus and Ares and Greek mythology and everything like that. The Amazons, all that stuff. Greek mythology. It's giving it to you right there. Look at the shield that has the star. She has the star and the crescent, star and the moon. Her name is the moon. So we find this stuff as so many different things. It's always going back to Greek mythology. And the point I want you to get in this first part, because there's so much more we're going to get into in this series, so you can see clearly, one, what the Greeks have done and what they're doing. Let's go. Let's go back to Greek mythology real quick. And let's go to the garden. Not the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Hesperides. Some of you know what I'm talking about. The Garden of Hesperides. What is that? They get into the Garden of Hesperides, and depending on which author you read from, there were either 3, 4, or 7 Hesperides. The Hesperides were these women who basically guarded the tree. This tree had golden apples that, if bitten, will grant immortality. Sounds familiar? To make it sound even more familiar, they were joined by a serpent dragon named Ladon, who, if you read in Greek mythology, depending on which one you read from, not Zeus, but Hercules kills Ladon. So you have, clear as day, the Garden of Eden story as far as the serpent and the women and the fruit and immortality right there in ancient Greek mythology. But we know we could find it in Kemet as well, minus the serpent. But the tree is there. When you understand, as I said before, all of this stuff comes from the Greeks and the Romans. They created Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all of which they control still to this day. But it's all movies. You know, what do we talk about? We talk about the movies. We're talking about Hollywood. And who owns Hollywood according to everybody? The Jews. The Jews own Hollywood. Remember, people always say, well, the Jews responsible for everything. The Jews responsible for slavery. The Jews responsible for this and that and this and that. The Jews run Hollywood. But who are the Jews really? Who are they? Goes back to the Greeks. Remember, the Greeks created the Jews. They created Judaism. They created the Hebrews. So who's really running what? The Greeks, the Romans, the white man. Plain and simple. So when you pay attention, when you start to see this, it start to, take shape in front of your face, that we're talking about two different people here. When you look at the citizens of Israel, take a look at them. They look mixed. When you look at the real Jews in power, look at these people standing around the president. They look like white men. Because that's what they are. It's a big deception right in front of your face. These are the people who hide behind the Jewish garb, the Jewish beard, the name, but they are really Romans, really Greeks, really white men. And we always say Jews run the world. The Jews, the Jews, the Jews. The Jews killed Jesus. The Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Who are they? You have people masquerading as Jews, but are really white men. Steven Spielberg. You see these people who claim Judaism. What are they? So we get that understanding that these people are really Romans, white men in power, using Judaism to cover up who they really are. And if you are smart and you have some kind of, knowledge, you understand that if you want to gain any kind of power in this world, if you are in the eye of these people in power, if you want power, if you want to keep your position or grow your position, you go to the wall. You go to the wall. All you got to do is pay attention to who has been to the wall. Who goes to the wall? Everybody goes to the wall. Your presidents, they go to the wall. Bush, Clinton, Obama, Trump. Actors go to the wall. Mick Jagger goes to the wall. Morgan Freeman goes to the wall. Look at these people. Even Mini-Me, Vern Troyer at the wall. Omar Epps. Everybody goes to the wall. And look at this knucklehead Tyrese over here at the wall acting the fool. Acting. And then he goes and put this on and go to Dubai and act some more. But Tyrese is smart. He knows what he's doing. He knows that those presidents have done the same thing. They have went to the wall and then they went and bowed their head before the Saudis. It's a game. There are rules. And you got to understand how this stuff works and who is really in power. It's a big front, big, mask, shroud that's over the faces of the unconscious people of this world. And even over the face of people who believe they are conscious. It's a lot you're not seeing and don't understand.